The desert was quiet, eerily so. At 3:17 a.m. local time, the silence over the Negev was shattered by a single, thunderous impact. A missile, sleek and precise, tore through the sky and struck the heart of Israel's southern training base. Within seconds, the facility, once bustling with drills, strategy briefings, and the hum of armored vehicles, was reduced to scorched rubble. The Al-Fajr missile, launched from Iranian territory, had found its mark with chilling accuracy. Surveillance footage later revealed the missile's trajectory, a high arc over Jordanian airspace, a brief dip in altitude, and then the final descent, unintercepted, unchallenged. This wasn't just a strike. It was a statement. The Negev base, known for housing elite IDF units and advanced simulation centers, had long been considered impenetrable. Reinforced bunkers, radar shielding, and Iron Dome coverage were supposed to guarantee its safety. But the Al-Fajr's stealth capabilities and speed bypassed every layer of defense. The explosion left a crater nearly 20 meters wide. Concrete, steel, and sand fused into a molten pit. The command center, located just 40 meters from the impact zone, was obliterated. No warning, no scramble, no countermeasure. In Tel Aviv, military officials scrambled to assess the breach. Initial reports suggested a failure in early detection systems. Others pointed to a deliberate blind spot in satellite coverage. But the truth was simpler and more unsettling. Iran had tested a new generation of precision-guided weaponry, and Israel's most secure facility had become its proving ground. The cost? Billions in infrastructure. The message? Vulnerability is no longer theoretical. The aftermath was brutal. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, but the damage was already done. Smoke billowed into the night sky, visible from Beersheba nearly 40 kilometers away. The base's perimeter fencing had been shredded, and the barracks, home to over 200 soldiers, were engulfed in flames. Rescue teams moved fast, pulling survivors from collapsed structures, navigating through twisted metal and debris. The air was thick with dust and the acrid stench of burning fuel. Medics worked under floodlights, their hands trembling as they treated blast injuries, burns, and trauma. For many, the training ground had become a battlefield. The Israeli Defense Forces declared a state of high alert across southern command zones. Drones were launched to scan for follow-up threats. Fighter jets scrambled from Ramon Air Base, slicing through the sky in search of launch sites. But the missile had come from deep within Iranian territory, far beyond the reach of immediate retaliation. Intelligence analysts pored over satellite data, trying to understand how the missile evaded detection. The Al-Fajr wasn't just fast, it was smart. Its flight path had been programmed to mimic commercial air traffic patterns, slipping past radar systems designed to filter out civilian routes. Inside the Knesset, political leaders convened an emergency session. The Prime Minister, visibly shaken, addressed the nation. This was not just an attack on our military, it was an attack on our sovereignty. The speech was brief, but the implications were vast. Questions swirled about Israel's preparedness, its reliance on US-backed defense systems, and the possibility of a broader conflict. Meanwhile, Iranian state media celebrated the strike, calling it a strategic victory against Zionist aggression. The rhetoric was incendiary, but the impact was real. The Negev base was gone, and with it, a sense of invincibility. By morning, the global response was already unfolding. News outlets across Europe and North America ran breaking headlines. Israeli base destroyed. Iranian missile penetrates defense grid. Middle East on edge. Analysts debated the implications on live television. Was this a one-off strike or the beginning of a new phase in regional warfare? In Washington, President Donald Trump issued a statement condemning the attack, calling it a reckless escalation that threatens global stability. The Pentagon confirmed it was in close contact with Israeli defense officials, reviewing satellite imagery and offering strategic support. But behind the scenes, the tone was more urgent. The strike had exposed vulnerabilities not just in Israel's defense systems, but in Western deterrence as a whole. In Tehran, the mood was triumphant. State-run channels aired footage of military commanders celebrating the successful launch. Crowds gathered in major cities, waving flags and chanting slogans. The Al-Fajr missile, long rumored to be in development, had now entered the battlefield with devastating effect. Iranian officials claimed the strike was a response to covert Israeli operations in Syria, an act of retaliation, not aggression. But the precision and timing suggested something more calculated. This wasn't reactive. It was strategic. Back in Israel, the military began a full-scale audit of its southern command. Engineers combed through wreckage, collecting fragments of the missile for analysis. Cybersecurity teams investigated whether digital interference had played a role in the radar failure. The Iron Dome system, once hailed as impenetrable, was now under scrutiny. Military spokespeople remained tight-lipped, but internal memos leaked to the press hinted at a chilling possibility. The Al-Fajr had been designed specifically to exploit known weaknesses in Israeli defense protocols. If true, it meant Iran had more than firepower, it had intelligence. The psychological impact rippled far beyond the blast zone. For the soldiers stationed at Negev, many of whom were fresh recruits, the attack shattered more than concrete. It shattered confidence. Training exercises had always simulated missile strikes, but nothing prepared them for the real thing. Survivors described the moment of impact as surreal, a blinding flash, a deafening roar, and then silence. Some ran instinctively, others froze. One officer recounted dragging two cadets from a collapsed dormitory, their faces covered in soot, their eyes wide with disbelief. It wasn't war, he said. It was annihilation. Families across Israel woke to news alerts and frantic calls. Parents of soldiers stationed at the base flooded emergency hotlines, desperate for updates. Social media lit up with images of the destruction, grainy, shaky footage captured by nearby residents. The crater, the flames, the twisted remains of armored vehicles, it all felt unreal. But the grief was real. By midday, the IDF confirmed casualties, 27 dead, 83 injured, several in critical condition. The names were withheld, pending notification. But the nation mourned collectively. Vigils were held in Jerusalem, Haifa, and Ashdod. Candles flickered beside photos of young men and women in uniform, faces that had once smiled with pride, now memorialized in silence. Military psychologists were deployed to counsel survivors. The trauma ran deep. Some spoke of recurring nightmares, others of guilt. Why them, not me? The base had been a symbol of strength, a place where soldiers were forged. Now it was a scar on the landscape. And beneath the grief, a question lingered. If Negev could fall, what else was vulnerable? The illusion of security had been pierced. And in its place, a sobering truth emerged. Modern warfare isn't just about weapons. It's about unpredictability. International diplomacy shifted into overdrive. The United Nations Security Council called an emergency meeting with ambassadors from key nations demanding de-escalation. Russia urged restraint, but stopped short of condemning Iran. China emphasized regional stability, while France and the UK backed Israel's right to self-defense. Behind closed doors, intelligence agencies exchanged data, trying to piece together the full scope of Iran's missile capabilities. The Al-Fajr wasn't just a weapon, it was a signal. Its success meant that future strikes could be more frequent, more precise, and harder to predict. The balance of power in the Middle East had tilted, and no one could ignore it. Israel's response was measured but firm. Within 48 hours, targeted airstrikes hit suspected Iranian proxy sites in Syria and Lebanon. The IDF released footage of precision bombings, emphasizing that retaliation would be calibrated, not chaotic. But the tone had changed. Military analysts noted a shift in doctrine, from deterrence to disruption. Israel wasn't just defending itself anymore. It was preparing for a new kind of warfare, one where distance no longer guaranteed safety. The Negev strike had rewritten the rules. In the days that followed, the crater at the training base became a symbol, not just of destruction, but of awakening. Soldiers returned to the site, not for drills, but for remembrance. flags were lowered, names were read aloud, and amid the silence, a vow was made to rebuild, to adapt, to never be caught off guard again. The desert, once quiet, now carried echoes of resolve. The Al-Fajr missile had done more than destroy a base. It had ignited a transformation. And in that transformation, a new chapter began. One shaped not by fear, but by readiness.